Before we begin this emotional, heartwarming story, please tell us in the comments where are you watching from? We love to hear that. Thank you. Anthony Charles wasn't just a millionaire. He was the Anthony Charles, New York's golden heir to the Charles Empire. Every day his name danced across headlines and magazine covers. He had inherited a dynasty of steel, finance, and legacy. People admired him, envied him, even feared him. They saw the fast cars, the towering penthouses, the glittering parties. But no one saw the boy underneath. The boy taught to never cry. The boy trained to wear perfection like armor. The boy whose heart had been wrapped in cold expectation since birth. He had everything the world could offer, except someone who looked into his eyes and didn't see dollar signs. Aurelia Nessa was that someone. She lived in a quiet part of the city. No driver, no security. Just her and the children she taught. She wasn't looking for wealth. She was looking for kindness, and she gave it freely to every child who walked into her classroom. She taught them more than letters and numbers. She taught them to be brave, to speak kindly, to love deeply. She had a smile that could soften storms, eyes that held stories, and a laugh that made even strangers turn to look. The day they met wasn't planned. It was a charity event hosted by Anthony's company. Aurelia was there by choice, volunteering. Anthony was there for photos. She sat on a small stool, painting butterflies on little cheeks. Her apron was splattered with paint and glitter. Anthony, bored, checked his phone as the cameras clicked. He stepped too close. A child spun in excitement. Sploosh! Purple glitter spilled across his $1,000 suit. Everyone gasped. The photographers froze. The assistant panicked. But Aurelia, she laughed, a soft, unfiltered laugh that rang like music. I'm so sorry, she chuckled, trying to wipe the glitter, but she only made it worse. Anthony stared at her, shocked. No one ever laughed at him, especially not when he looked ridiculous. But instead of snapping, he felt something stir. Her fingers brushed his jacket. She smelled like vanilla and crayons. It's just glitter, she smiled. You'll survive. And in that moment, he forgot about his reputation. He forgot about the cameras. He even forgot about the suit. He only remembered the feeling of being seen. Days passed, then weeks. He found her again, at the school, brought donations, stayed longer than he needed. Watched her from the hallway, surrounded by children. She wasn't pretending. She wasn't acting impressed. She was simply real. Their first date wasn't in a five-star restaurant. It was a walk through Central Park, with hot cocoa in hand. She wore a red scarf. He wore something that didn't cost $5,000 on her request. They talked, really talked. She asked questions no one ever asked him. Not about stocks or business, but about what he was afraid of, what made him cry as a child, what made him feel. And he told her. Something about Aurelia made his walls crumble. She listened, not to respond, but to understand. Her hand in his felt like home. Not luxury, but peace. He began doing things he never did before. Canceled meetings just to visit her class. Held tiny hands of children with paint-stained fingers. Laughed more, frowned less. But the world around them wasn't so accepting, especially his world. His mother, Judith Charles, queen of cold stares and sharp pearls, was furious. She's a teacher, Anthony, from Queens. She's not like us. You are a Charles. Remember your name. He remembered, but he also remembered Aurelia's laugh, her kindness, her strength. His friends whispered behind his back. They sent him links to society women, models, heiresses, daughters of oil tycoons. But he ignored them. He only wanted one who loved him not for his name, but for the man behind the name. So he planned a proposal, not in a ballroom, not with a marching band, but in her classroom, surrounded by paper hearts and kids yelling, "Say yes!" And she did. With tears in her eyes and laughter in her voice, she whispered, "Yes, Anthony, yes." It was the beginning of their fairy tale. At least, it was supposed to be. The wedding date was set, the dress chosen, the invitations delivered in silk envelopes. The city buzzed. The millionaire marries the teacher. Headlines screamed. Some called it romantic. Others called it a scandal. Still, Aurelia dreamed of walking down the aisle, of holding his hand, of dancing under the stars with the man she loved. She believed love was enough, but in the world of gold and greed, love was about to be tested, and no one, not even Anthony, was ready for what would happen next. The sun rose gently over the Charles estate. Golden rays spilled through crystal windows. The scent of white roses floated through the air. It was a morning that promised magic, a morning where love was supposed to win. Aurelia Nessa stood in a private room, surrounded by women adjusting her gown. The dress was delicate lace, hand-stitched, soft like a dream. It shimmered in the morning light like something out of a fairy tale. Her hands trembled as she held her bouquet, white lilies, her favorite. Her heart fluttered like a bird inside a golden cage. Not because she was nervous, but because she was happy. Today she would become Anthony's wife, not just in the eyes of the world, but in the eyes of her heart, the man who saw through her quiet nature, the man who kissed her like she mattered, the man who told her love was enough. A soft knock came at the door. It was the wedding coordinator. "It's time." Aurelia took one last glance in the mirror. She didn't see perfection. She saw love, and with that, she stepped out of the room. Downstairs, the guests sat beneath grand chandeliers, whispering and waiting. Judith Charles, Anthony's mother, sat in the front row, stone-faced. Her hat was flawless, her glare sharper than ever. "She's not our kind," someone muttered in the crowd. "Imagine her teaching children with the Charles name. She's just a school teacher." But the whispers faded as the music began. The doors opened, and there she was. Aurelia stepped forward, one foot in front of the other, slowly, gracefully, with a quiet dignity no amount of money could ever buy. The lace of her gown floated behind her like a dream. Each step was filled with hope, each breath with courage. The guests turned, some in awe, some in judgment. But Aurelia kept walking, because at the end of the aisle was him, Anthony Charles, her love, her beginning, her future. She looked at him with eyes full of trust, but something was wrong. She felt it before she even reached him. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't reaching for her hand. He stood rigid, like a man frozen in fear or shame. Her smile wavered, just a little, but she kept walking. The music slowed. The room quieted. The priest opened his book, but before he could speak a single word, Anthony stepped forward, not toward Aurelia, but away. And then he said it, loud, clear, cold. "I can't do this. I've made a mistake." The words fell like thunder in the silent church. Time froze. Aurelia blinked. Her breath caught in her throat. The priest stuttered. The guests gasped. And then a ripple of murmurs began to spread. Judith Charles didn't look surprised, only satisfied. Aurelia opened her mouth, but no words came. She tried to understand. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe he was nervous. But Anthony's face was stone, emotionless, detached. "This marriage was a lie," he said, loud enough for every soul in the room to hear. "I thought I could look past it, but I can't." Her knees almost gave in, but she stood still. "She's not fit to be a Charles." Whispers turned into shock. "She's just not my kind," he added quietly, but intentionally. Aurelia felt her heart crack, right there, in front of hundreds of watching eyes, in front of children she taught, friends she loved, and a man she thought would never break her. Her fingers tightened around her bouquet. White petals shook, her vision blurred, but she refused to cry. She had believed love was enough. She had believed he was enough. But he had chosen pride. He had chosen fear. He had chosen the world over her. She turned to the guests. Eyes stared back at her, some filled with pity, some with mockery. But she wouldn't run. Number Aurelia Nessa would not run. She took a breath so deep it steadied her heart. She looked Anthony in the eyes, not with hate, but with clarity. And then she did the last thing anyone expected. She stepped forward, calm, elegant, strong, and said softly, "Then let me tell you who I really am." Silence hung in the air like a thick fog. The whispers had stopped. Even the chandeliers seemed to tremble in the stillness. Aurelia stood at the altar, the place where she was meant to be kissed, cherished, celebrated. Instead, she stood as a woman betrayed, a woman wounded, but not broken. Her lips quivered for a second, but then her spine straightened. And when she spoke, her voice, though soft, pierced through every inch of that golden room. You humiliated me, Anthony. You stood in front of the world and made me feel small, but you forgot something important. The crowd leaned forward. Even Judith Charles raised her eyes. I never told you everything, because I never thought I'd need to prove my worth to you. There it was, her pain, wrapped in strength. Her hands reached into her bouquet, trembling not with fear, but with purpose. She pulled something out, a piece of paper, faded, folded, handled too many times. A letter. This is from your father. Gasps broke the silence like glass shattering on marble. Anthony blinked. His face lost all color. He looked at the letter like it was a ghost rising from the past. He wrote it before he died, Aurelia continued. He met me before you ever did, at the children's hospital. The crowd shifted. People began whispering again, but now it was confusion, not judgment. Anthony's mouth opened, but no words came. I was volunteering there every Saturday, Aurelia said, voice steady now, with kids who had no families, who had no hair, who had no hope, and your father saw me kneeling beside one of them, just holding her hand. The memory came alive in her eyes. A little girl, no older than 5, tubes in her arms, and Aurelia, holding her hand, singing softly, brushing a strandless scalp with love. He watched me from across the room, she whispered. Then he walked up to me, with tears in his eyes, and he said, You remind me of the woman I love most, my wife, before money changed her. Gasps again, louder this time. Judith's face paled. He told me, if his son ever met someone like me, someone who made the world softer, someone who reminded him what real love looked like, that he should never, ever let her go. Anthony's chest rose and fell. Fast. He looked like the floor was slipping out from under him. He made me promise not to tell you, Aurelia said, her voice cracking but never breaking. He said if you love me, it should be because you chose to, not because he told you to. She stepped forward, gently, like a rose daring to bloom in a storm. She held out the letter. I kept it hidden all this time, not because I wanted to hide, but because I believed in you. Anthony took it, but his hands shook. His breath was shallow. The air was heavy with truth. The priest quietly stepped back. The guests sat in stunned silence. Even the violins at the back of the hall stopped tuning. Anthony unfolded the letter. The first line read, To my son, if you are reading this, it means you found someone. His eyes darted across the page. Every word dug deeper into his soul. If you love someone who makes you feel free, who humbles your pride, who teaches you to care. His eyes filled with tears. Hold on to her. I met her. She's real. Her name is Aurelia Nessa. He staggered, one step back, one hand over his mouth. You could hear hearts breaking for him. And for her. Judith stood abruptly. Impossible, she muttered. But no one looked at her. All eyes were on the man who had everything and had just thrown away the one thing money could never buy. Aurelia's voice came again, this time gentler. You were the man I believed in, Anthony. I didn't love your name. I loved you. But today you loved your pride more than me. A tear slid down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. She let the world see her pain, because that's what real love does. It's not afraid of tears. You judged me by the family I came from, but your father saw the family I built with every child I taught. You listened to voices that said I wasn't enough, but he saw someone more than enough. Anthony stepped forward. Aurelia, She raised her hand, softly, not cruelly. Not now. Not here. A child's soft voice echoed suddenly from the back of the room. Miss Nessa? Aurelia turned. It was Lily, a girl from her class, holding a small card. The girl ran down the aisle and handed it to her. "You forgot your vows," Lily whispered. Aurelia looked down at the crumpled paper. Tears filled her eyes again. Then gently, she knelt beside Lily, hugged her, and turned to face the guests. "I wrote these for a man I thought I knew, but maybe someone else in this room needs to hear them." And she read, "I promise to love not what's on paper, but what's in the soul. I promise to walk beside you, even when storms rise. I promise to remind you that love isn't a contract, it's a choice. Every day." Then she looked straight at Anthony. "But love is only love, if both hearts are brave enough to hold it." She placed the vows on the altar and walked away, not broken, but rising. The silence in the room was deafening. The air, once thick with whispers and judgment, was now thick with shame. It was the kind of silence that settled deep into your bones and echoed across your soul. And in that silence, Anthony stood frozen. His eyes were locked on Aurelia, but they didn't see the woman he thought he knew. No, they saw the truth, the undeniable truth, that he had crushed something pure, something beautiful, out of fear. Fear of what? Fear of losing everything. Fear of his world falling apart. Fear of being seen for what he truly was. The words from the letter still swirled in his mind, but they weren't enough to undo the damage he had already done. How could they be? How could any words undo the pain of a broken heart? Aurelia's presence seemed to fill the room, soft and strong. Her pain was there for all to see, but also her quiet strength. Anthony felt his heart tightening in his chest. It was as if he was drowning in guilt. Each breath felt heavier than the last. He had betrayed her, betrayed himself, and now he would have to live with it. The guests, who had once admired him, now looked uncomfortable. Some avoided his gaze. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Judith Charles, his mother, was a pale shadow of herself. Her proud eyes, eyes that had once been cold, calculating, were now filled with a mixture of fear and regret. She hadn't expected this. None of them had. Anthony's eyes moved from Aurelia to the guests, to his mother, to the stage he had built for himself, and he saw it all fading. The wealth, the status, the power, it all felt meaningless now. It was a hollow existence built on a foundation of fear. Fear of not being enough, fear of being judged, fear of losing control. And in that moment, Anthony understood the most painful truth of all. The thing he had been running from his whole life wasn't the world's judgment. It was his own. "Why didn't you tell me?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Yet it carried the weight of 1,000 questions. His words trembled, breaking through the silence like a shattered glass. Aurelia didn't flinch. She didn't react with anger or scorn. Instead, she simply looked at him with eyes that had seen the depths of his soul and understood the hurt that lingered there. Her voice was gentle, but it hit him like 1,000 crashing waves. "Because, Anthony, if you truly loved me, you wouldn't need a letter to believe in me." Her words were like a lightning bolt, striking deep into his chest. They shattered something inside him, something fragile, something that had been keeping him from the truth for far too long. Anthony had always thought he was better than others, better than the men who worked for him, better than the people who looked up to him with envy, better than the world that judged him by his wealth. He had been raised to believe that his name, his family, his money were everything that mattered. But now, standing here in front of the woman who had seen past all that, he realized how wrong he had been. Aurelia had never cared about the things he thought defined him. She had never asked him to prove anything other than the truth of his heart. But he had chosen to hide behind a mask of pride. He had chosen to let the fear of judgment, of his family, of society, of his own weakness, dictate his decisions. And now, standing there in front of her, with the letter from his father burning in his hand, he knew that he had crushed the one thing that had been real. Real love, real connection. He had chosen pride over love, fear over faith, and in doing so, he had lost her. The cameras that had once captured his every move now seemed like ghosts of a past that no longer mattered. The guests, the glittering guests, fading away, irrelevant. The wedding, the promises, the expectations, no longer a part of his world. All that was left now was the truth, the raw, painful truth. Aurelia had never needed him to be perfect. She had never needed him to be rich. She had never asked for anything other than his heart, but he had given her nothing but his pride. Anthony closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he felt the weight of something other than success. He felt shame. He felt regret. He felt lost. He opened his eyes and looked at Aurelia, and he finally saw her, not as a trophy to be shown off, not as a reflection of his wealth, but as the woman she truly was, the woman who had stood beside him in ways no one ever had. Aurelia Nessa was everything he had ever wanted, and everything he had ever feared. He stepped forward, his voice cracked, raw and full of emotion. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I don't know how I let it get this far, but I love you, I do. I always have." But Aurelia didn't move. She didn't speak. She simply watched him, her gaze full of something deeper than anger. It was a look of knowing, of understanding. And for the first time, Anthony knew that the journey he had to take wasn't about winning her back. It was about winning back the man he had lost, the man who wasn't defined by pride, the man who wasn't afraid to love, the man who was willing to give everything for the one who deserved it most. And yet Aurelia remained silent. The silence between them was not one of anger. It was a silence that spoke of boundaries, of a love that had been broken, and the painful realization that the path forward would be long, if not impossible. A year had passed since the day everything shattered. The world had moved on, as it always did. Headlines about Anthony Charles faded into memory. The billionaire heir who once graced the front pages of every magazine had become a ghost in the world he had once ruled. There were no more flashy parties, no more charity galas where his name sparkled in the spotlight. No more red carpets, no more cameras. Instead, Anthony Charles was learning a new way of living, one that didn't involve power, pride, or perfection. He was at the local community school now, wearing a simple shirt and jeans, his hands calloused from hard work. He had given up half of his wealth, money that had once defined his very existence. He had built a foundation for children without families, children who had no one to turn to. He worked with his hands, learning what it meant to build from the ground up. Every day he learned patience, resilience, and the value of true connection. But the most important lesson he had learned was not in his charity work, not in the foundation he had built, not in the community he had tried to serve. The lesson he had learned was about love. He learned that love was not something you could buy. It was not something you could demand or expect. Love had to be earned. And in the silence of his lonely nights, with no money to soothe his loneliness, he understood that love was never about what you had. It was about who you were. It was about how you made someone feel. It was about the sacrifices you were willing to make. It was about becoming a better person, not for anyone else, but for yourself. He didn't ask for forgiveness from Aurelia. He didn't expect it. He simply worked beside her, day in and day out. He learned to be a teacher, just as she had been. He watched her with quiet admiration as she worked with the children, her patience a lesson in itself. Aurelia had never spoken about the past. She had never asked for apologies. She never held her head high with bitterness or anger. She just worked, and in doing so, she taught him how to love without conditions, without pride, without any expectations. She had shown him what it meant to give yourself to others, to open your heart even when it had been broken. And slowly, piece by piece, Anthony found himself changing. He found the person he had once been, the man who had loved her deeply, coming back to life. The man who had feared judgment, who had been too proud to let go of his legacy, now stood in the light of a new truth. But there was still one thing he hadn't done, one thing that weighed on him more than anything else. 1 year later, on a warm summer evening, under the stars in the schoolyard where they first met, Anthony found the courage to take the next step. He had spent weeks thinking about this moment, wondering if he could ever be the man she deserved, wondering if she could ever forgive him, not for his mistakes, but for his failure to be the man she had always seen in him. He didn't need a diamond. He didn't need a grand gesture. What he needed was simple. Under the starlit sky, with the quiet hum of the schoolyard around them, he knelt down on the soft grass, Not with the opulence of his past, but with a simple silver ring. Aurelia, his voice was soft, yet steady, as he looked up into her eyes. I don't ask for your hand. I ask for another chance, as a man who now understands love. His words hung in the air between them, raw and full of emotion. For the first time, he wasn't hiding behind wealth. He wasn't hiding behind power. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He was simply asking for her to see him, not as the man who had hurt her, not as the billionaire who had failed her, but as the man who had learned what it meant to love, what it meant to sacrifice, and what it meant to grow. Aurelia stood there, her eyes glistening under the moonlight. She didn't need to think for long. Her heart had known the answer long before he had even spoken the words. She smiled softly, a smile that lit up her face, her heart, and the world around her. Yes, she whispered, her voice full of warmth, full of hope. She took the ring, not because it was a diamond, not because it came with wealth or status, but because it came with the most precious gift of all, change. She took it because he had earned it. He had earned the chance to prove his love, to prove his sincerity, and to show her that he was willing to fight for their future, together. And in that moment, everything changed. Anthony Charles, the man who had once been defined by his fortune, had finally understood the most important lesson of all. Love wasn't something you could buy. It wasn't something you could demand. It was something you could only give. And Aurelia, the woman who had taught him to love, to grow, and to become better, had opened her heart once again, not to the man he had been, but to the man he had become. This story became known in the town. It was told in schools, whispered in weddings, and remembered in hearts. It taught that racism, pride, and classism only create walls, but love, truth, and humility, they tear those walls down. Even the coldest heart can change if someone dares to stand strong and speak the truth.